Tomlinson just said what every One Direction fan has been waiting 9 years to hear, and honestly, you're not ready for this. In a nearly 2-hour podcast that had theaters full of people sobbing, Lewis finally broke his silence about the day One Direction died, what really happened with Zayn, and the devastating phone call about Liam Payne that shattered him. And if you think you know the One Direction story, think again. October 8th, Lewis sits down for Diary of a CEO. The cameras roll, and within minutes, Stephen Bartlett asks the question that makes Lewis's voice crack. What happened when Neil called you about Liam? Lewis takes a breath. He says Neil asked if he'd seen the news, and in that moment, he just knew. He knew what Neil was about to say. Can you imagine that sinking feeling? That split second where your world is about to collapse. But here's what Lewis said next that absolutely wrecked me. He thought he could save Liam. He gave what he calls his 150% to be there for his friend during his darkest days. But then Lewis says something that should haunt all of us. Quote, "My 150% wasn't nearly enough. It's my own arrogance thinking I could have helped. Really, because it was so much deeper than what I could have done for him." If you're feeling this, hit that subscribe button because we're going deeper into revelations that the media isn't talking about. Lewis called Liam's death unjust and frustrating. 2 words that carry the weight of survivors' guilt, of helplessness, of watching someone you love slip away despite everything you try. And Lewis thought he was prepared for this kind of grief. He'd already lost his mother to leukemia in 2016. He'd already buried his younger sister after she overdosed in 2019. Surely, he thought, surely he could handle losing Liam. But then Lewis says something that shows just how different this pain is. Super naive. It's very different. I've never lost a friend before. Let that sink in. He'd lost family. He'd experienced unimaginable tragedy. But losing Liam? That was a grief he'd never navigated. A grief that came with memories of stages and tour buses and inside jokes, and a bond forged in the absolute chaos of global superstardom that only 4 other people on Earth could understand. Now here's where the story gets even more complex because Lewis didn't just open up about Liam. He went back to where the cracks first started showing. 2015. Zayn Malik walks away from One Direction while they're on tour, and Lewis's world tilts on its axis. He uses the word crushed. Not disappointed, not surprised, crushed. And make sure you're subscribed, because what he reveals about Zayn is something the fandom has speculated about for years. Lewis says Zayn was his best mate in the band at that time. So when Zayn left, it wasn't just about the group losing a member. Lewis lost a friend. And that question everyone's been asking for 9 years? Lewis wants to know the answer too. Does Zayn regret it? Lewis thinks he must miss it. Despite Zayn's solo success, despite everything he's accomplished on his own, Lewis believes there's a part of Zayn that wonders what if. But here's the thing that's wild. Even though they've met up recently, they don't talk about it. Lewis calls Zayn leaving the elephant in the room of their relationship. Can you imagine? 2 guys who shared this insane experience, who were best friends, and there's this massive thing between them that just hangs there unspoken. But Lewis says there will be a time for that conversation. And honestly, with the new 3-part Netflix series they just announced where they're doing a road trip across America together, maybe that time is coming sooner than we think. Now let's talk about the day that changed everything. The day One Direction officially broke up. Lewis finally confirmed what that room felt like, and it's honestly chilling. Keep watching because this next part reveals who really wanted the band to end. Lewis says only the band members were there for that meeting, but it might as well have been their representatives. Cold, professional, distant. He talks about this emptiness in the room, this energy he'd never felt before in One Direction. Because usually it was all camaraderie, all brotherhood. But that day, people were thinking independently, thinking for themselves. And Lewis makes it clear they had every right to do that. But the room felt cold. That's the word he keeps using. Cold. Lewis wanted to know how long the hiatus would last. He asked, and here's the gut punch. He never got an answer. He understands now why. Because deep down, the person or people who wanted out probably knew it was permanent. But they weren't brave enough to say it out loud. So instead of honesty, there was just this cold room and a vague promise of someday. So will One Direction ever reunite? Lewis says never say never. But then he adds something that makes it clear how complicated this is now. He's not sure it would be right after Liam's death. Maybe in 25 years they'll pull an Oasis and do it for a massive payday. But here's the irony that made me tear up. Lewis says there's no one who would have campaigned harder for a One Direction reunion than Liam. If this story hit you as hard as it hit me, do me a favor and subscribe. Share this with every Directioner you know. Because Lewis Tomlinson just gave us the rawest, most honest look at the band that defined a generation, at loss that cuts deeper than headlines can capture, and at friendships that survive even when the dream doesn't. Lewis walked into that podcast holding back tears. He talked about impossible grief, and cold rooms, and phone calls that change everything. And he reminded us that behind the biggest boy band in the world were just 5 guys trying to navigate something none of them were prepared for. Stay for the next video where we break down everything we know about that Netflix series with Lewis and Zayn, because if this interview taught us anything, it's that the One Direction story is far from over.